Hello, everyone. Good to see you, and hope you enjoy the new story. Subscribe and like the story. I used to believe Linda's smile could fix anything. When we first met, it was the kind of smile that could pull you in like gravity, bright, easy, and full of promises she didn't even need to say out loud. I fell for it, for her, faster than I probably should have. And for a long time, I didn't regret it. I didn't regret the long hours I worked to make sure she never wanted for anything, or the life we built together, simple but solid, like a well-kept home. But lately, that smile has been different. It's smaller, tighter, forced. I noticed it the other morning when I sat across from her at breakfast. Ellie and Brian, our kids, were bickering about who got the last pancake, Ellie, being older, won as usual, and I looked up at Linda. She had this faraway look, staring out the window like she couldn't even hear them. I asked, "You okay?" just to break the silence, and she blinked like I'd yanked her out of some dream she wasn't ready to leave. "Fine," she said, forcing a smile as she pushed her hair behind her ear. That was it. Just, "Fine." I wanted to ask again, but I didn't. That's marriage, isn't it? Sometimes you pick your battles, and sometimes you let it go because it's probably nothing. But it's not nothing, is it? It's the little things that get under your skin, like splinters you can't pull out. The way she lingers in the living room when she says she's going out for air. The way her phone screen lights up, and she flips it over before I can see it. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that I'm imagining it. After all, Linda has always been honest, hasn't she? She's the mother of my children, my wife. She wouldn't. No. I can't think like that. I shake off the thought and push myself away from the table. "I'll pick up a few extra hours today," I say, grabbing my jacket and car keys. Linda doesn't look up. She just hums a quiet, distracted, "Okay," like my being gone all day doesn't matter to her one way or another. That's the thing about silence. It's not always peaceful. Sometimes it's suffocating, like standing in a room with the walls pressing in. The drive to work is a straight shot through town. I've taken the same route every day for 10 years. Past the bakery, the hardware store, the little gas station where Ellie always asks for candy when we fill up. It's comforting, in a way, having the same view. Familiar. Reliable. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm too predictable. I work as a supervisor at the mill. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and I'm good at it. The guys there joke about being married to the job, but I always laugh and tell them I'm lucky. I've got Linda waiting for me at home. Used to be, that got me a few pats on the back or, "Lucky bastard," remarks. But now, I don't mention her as much. When I finally clock out, the sun is already dipping low. I sit in the car for a minute before heading home, leaning my forehead against the steering wheel. The truth is, I'm tired, not the kind of tired a night's sleep can fix. I don't want to walk into that house and feel like a stranger sitting at my own dinner table. But I go home anyway. I always do. Dinner is quiet. Too quiet. The kids talk about their day, Ellie's spelling test, Brian's new drawing, but Linda barely says a word. She picks at her food, her fork scraping against the plate in a way that makes my teeth grind. "Everything okay?" I ask again, my voice low. She looks up, and for the first time in a long time, I see something flash in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or frustration. "I said I'm fine, Philip." I let it drop because the kids are watching, but inside, my chest feels tight. It's like I don't know her anymore, like the woman across the table is some hollow version of the Linda I married. After dinner, I sit in the living room with Brian, helping him put together one of his Lego sets. It's something we've done since he was 4. He chatters about the pieces, asking if I think we should make it taller or wider. I'm trying to focus on him, on this moment, but I can see Linda out of the corner of my eye. She's on her phone again, curled up in the armchair like she's trying to disappear into it. I keep telling myself to trust her. I've always trusted her. But trust is funny. It's easy when things are good. When things feel off, when your gut starts twisting, it becomes a fragile thing. That night, when the kids are in bed, I lie awake next to her. The bedroom is dark except for the faint glow of the alarm clock. I can hear her breathing, slow and steady, like she's already asleep. My mind won't stop racing, though. What's going on with her? Where does she go when she says she's going out? Who is she talking to when she thinks I'm not watching? I feel sick just thinking it, but I can't stop. I turn on my side and stare at her back. The woman I used to know so well, her habits, her laugh, the way her nose crinkled when she smiled, is still lying next to me. But it feels like there's a wall between us now, one I don't know how to tear down. And for the first time in our marriage, I wonder if I ever will. I always believed a man's home was his castle, a place of peace, safety, and loyalty. I built that life for Linda and me, brick by brick. I worked my ass off so she wouldn't have to. I thought we were solid, unshakable. But lately, I've felt the cracks in the foundation. I couldn't see them at first, but I felt them, like splinters under my skin. And now, the cracks were spreading. It started small, like these things always do. Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table nursing a coffee, while Linda leaned against the counter with her phone in hand. Her back was to me, but I could tell she was smiling at whatever she was reading. It wasn't the kind of smile she gave me anymore. It was soft, private, like she'd forgotten I was even in the room. "You going somewhere?" I asked. My voice came out calm, steady. It always did, even when my gut told me something wasn't right. Linda blinked and turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at me over her shoulder. Oh, yeah. I'm meeting Sarah for coffee." Sarah. Again. Sarah needed Linda all the time these days. I nodded, pretending to sip my coffee. "Didn't you see her yesterday?" For a moment, there it was, just the smallest flicker of panic in her eyes before she plastered on that easy fake smile of hers. "We didn't get to finish talking," she said lightly. "It's nothing. It's nothing." Funny how those two words can dig a pit in your stomach. Linda didn't say goodbye when she left. She grabbed her coat, tucked her phone into her bag, and slipped out the door without another glance in my direction. I stared at the empty doorway long after it closed, my coffee cold in my hands. That afternoon, the kids were at a birthday party, and I had the house to myself. I tried to keep busy, mowing the lawn, fixing the broken hinge on the back gate, cleaning out the garage. I've always been the kind of man who works with his hands. You build things, fix things, maintain things. That's how you keep a house standing. But no matter how much I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. It sat there, heavy, pressing against my ribs every time I thought of Linda. The late nights. The constant texting. The way she started dressing up, even when she said she was just running errands. It wasn't just the physical stuff. It was the way she looked at me now, or didn't look at me, like I'd turned invisible. I didn't want to be that husband. The one who snoops and accuses. The one who doesn't trust his wife. I told myself it was probably all in my head, that I was tired and overthinking things. But that voice in my head, the one I've learned to listen to over the years, wouldn't shut up. When Linda came home that night, I was in the living room, pretending to watch a baseball game. I heard her keys in the door, her boots on the tile, the way she paused in the entryway as if she was checking to see where I was. "You're back late," I said. She froze for a second before walking into the room, forcing a casual smile. "We just lost track of time." You know how Sarah gets when she starts venting about Jeff. Sarah. Always Sarah. I nodded, my eyes on the TV. Did you have a good time? Yeah, she said quickly. It was nice. Nice. She walked upstairs without another word, but that's when I saw it, a smudge of dirt on the back of her coat collar. It was small, barely noticeable, but my mind latched onto it. A smudge like that wouldn't come from sitting in a coffee shop. I stayed on the couch, staring at nothing, as I heard the shower running upstairs. My thoughts raced, picking apart every word she'd said, every look she'd given me, or not given me, in the past month. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my whole world was about to fall apart. The next day, I found the proof. It was a Sunday, and Linda left in the morning to help Sarah organize her garage sale. I pretended to believe her. She kissed Ellie and Brian on the forehead before leaving and barely looked in my direction as she grabbed her keys. I waited until her car was out of the driveway before I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened the drawer in the kitchen where she kept her spare phone charger. Linda was careful. She didn't leave much lying around anymore, but she wasn't as careful as she thought. In the bottom of the drawer, I found a crumpled receipt. A steakhouse. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. A total that made my stomach twist into knots. I stared at it, the paper shaking in my hand. This wasn't coffee with Sarah. This wasn't a garage sale. This was a date. I sat at the table for what felt like hours, the house silent around me. My mind went blank, except for one thought repeating over and over, who is he? When Linda came home that evening, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She walked into the kitchen, humming to herself, like everything was perfectly fine. She smiled at me, that smile, and for a moment, I wondered how many times I'd been a fool, sitting at this same table while she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "Kids in bed already?" she asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "They were tired." She nodded, setting her bag on the counter and pulling out her phone. I saw the screen light up with a message before she quickly flipped it over. That was it. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't look at her. I got up from the table and left the room, leaving her alone in the kitchen. My chest felt like it was caving in. That night, I didn't sleep. Linda lay next to me, her breathing slow and even, while I stared at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask. Who is he? How long has this been going on? What does he have that I don't? Around 3 in the morning, I finally got up. I sat in the living room in the dark, my head in my hands, trying to figure out what to do. A part of me wanted to grab her phone and go through every message, every call, every detail. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, even now, didn't want to see the proof. I didn't want to see how far she'd already gone. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The cracks had turned into a chasm, and there was no going back. The next morning, I left for work without saying goodbye. I didn't kiss her on the cheek like I usually did, and I didn't turn back when I walked out the door. Something had changed inside me. I wasn't going to sit back and let my life fall apart around me. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And when I did, I'd make damn sure she understood what she'd done to me, to us, to our family. I wasn't the kind of man who let his castle crumble without a fight. I don't know how long I sat in my car that day. The steering wheel felt cold under my hands as I stared at the house through the windshield, my mind a mess of anger, dread, and disbelief. My house. Our house. The place where we raised our kids and built a life together. And now I knew it had all been a lie. The sun was setting by the time I finally stepped out of the car. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of the living room lamp through the window. Linda's car was in the driveway, parked neatly like nothing was wrong. I opened the front door and stepped inside. The house felt quiet. Still. "Linda?" I called out. For a moment, nothing. Then her voice came from upstairs, cheerful and light. "Hey! I'll be down in a second." I stood in the entryway, clenching my fists so hard my knuckles ached. I'd played this moment out in my head a dozen times, trying to imagine what I'd say, how I'd act. But now that it was happening, all I felt was the sick weight of betrayal. Linda came down the stairs a minute later, her hair pulled up and a soft sweater hanging loosely around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw me. "You're home early," she said. "Everything okay?" I stared at her, at the woman I'd loved for over a decade. She was so calm, so casual, like the world hadn't just turned upside down. I couldn't stand it. "Where were you this afternoon?" I asked, my voice low. Linda's smile faltered. "I told you. Sarah's garage sale." I didn't blink. "Don't lie to me, Linda." Her face froze, just for a second, before she tried to laugh it off. "Philip, what's this about? Why are you acting so strange?" "Strange?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I'm acting strange because I know Linda. I know everything." Her smile was gone now. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at me, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "Know what?" she said softly, but there was no real curiosity in her voice. I pulled a crumpled receipt from my pocket and held it out. "Dinner for two. Steakhouse. 2 glasses of wine. Don't tell me Sarah ordered the second one." Her face drained of color. She didn't move, didn't speak. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, to tell me there was an explanation. But then her shoulders slumped. "Philip," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't." I cut her off. "Don't you dare try to explain this away." The anger I'd been holding back for days finally broke loose, spilling out like a dam that had burst. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I haven't noticed the late nights, the constant texting, the way you've been sneaking around like a damn teenager?" "Please," she said quickly, stepping toward me, her eyes wide. "It's not what you think. Not what I think." I barked, throwing the receipt onto the floor. "Are you kidding me? How long, Linda? How long has this been going on?" She flinched at the sound of my voice, her hand shaking now. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter," I repeated, my voice cold. "You don't get to decide what matters, Linda. How long?" She swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. "A few months." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I took a step back, my chest heaving. A few months. While I was working late to pay the bills, while I was coming home to tuck the kids into bed, she was out, with him. I wanted to scream, to break something, to throw her lies back in her face. But instead, I just stared at her, my voice hollow. "Who is he?" Linda shook her head. "It doesn't matter, Philip." "It does matter," I snapped. "Who is he?" She didn't answer. She just turned her head away, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I let out a bitter laugh and ran a hand through my hair. "You're unbelievable," I muttered. "I gave you everything. I broke my back trying to give you a good life. And this is how you repay me. I didn't mean for it to happen," she said through her tears, her voice breaking. "I was lonely, Philip. You were always working, always busy. Don't you dare blame this on me," I growled, pointing a finger at her. "Don't you dare." She fell silent, her shoulders shaking as she cried. I turned away, pacing the room, trying to calm the storm inside me. My head was spinning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Finally, I stopped and looked at her. You need to leave, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Linda's head snapped up. What? You heard me, I said. Pack a bag and get out. Tonight. Philip, please, she sobbed. Where am I supposed to go? Go to him, I spat. Isn't that what you want? She stared at me, her face crumpling. I made a mistake, she whispered. Please don't do this. I shook my head. You made your choice, Linda. Now you can live with it. The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. I turned my back to her, refusing to look at her any longer. Pack your things, I said again. And when you leave, don't come back. I walked upstairs and shut the bedroom door behind me, locking it for the first time since we'd moved into this house. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my face in my hands, and let the anger drain out of me, leaving only emptiness behind. Somewhere downstairs, I heard the front door open and close. Linda was gone. For now, at least. The morning after Linda left, the house was unnervingly quiet. The kids didn't know yet. Ellie and Brian were at Philip's parents' house for the weekend. At least for now, I didn't have to lie to their faces or figure out how to explain that their mother had shattered our family. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the cold coffee in front of me. It was strange how the smallest things suddenly felt heavier. The empty chair across from me was like a gaping hole in the room. 1,000 memories played in my mind. Our first breakfast as newlyweds, Linda helping Ellie cut her pancakes, Brian giggling over spilled syrup. And now, everything was broken. She chose this. That thought cut through the ache, stiffening my resolve. Linda made her bed. Now she could lie in it. By the time Ellie and Brian came home Sunday evening, I'd cleaned the house top to bottom. It wasn't just a distraction, it was a necessity. I stripped the bed we used to share, tossed her clothes in a bag, and threw out the bottle of lavender perfume she'd worn every time she snuck out. I was reclaiming my home. The kids burst through the door, all chatter and smiles. Ellie had won a game of checkers against Grandpa, and Brian couldn't stop talking about the ice cream they'd had. I forced a smile and ruffled their hair, but the weight on my shoulders pressed down like iron. "Where's Mom?" Ellie asked as she tossed her shoes in the hallway. The question stopped me cold. I looked at my daughter, so innocent, so trusting, and for a second, I didn't know what to say. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. She had to go away for a little while. Ellie frowned, and Brian tugged on my sleeve. Is she coming back? I couldn't lie to them. Not now. I don't know, I said softly. I tucked them into bed early that night. As I kissed Ellie goodnight, she whispered, "Tell Mom I miss her." I sat on the edge of my bed for hours after they fell asleep, staring at the wall, wishing I knew how to make this easier for them. But I didn't. All I could do now was protect them. The next morning, I made the first call to a lawyer. Jack Forrester's office wasn't much to look at, just a small room with too many legal books piled on the shelves, but the man himself was sharp as a blade. He had a reputation for winning ugly divorces, which was exactly what I needed. "What can I do for you, Philip?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, his pen tapping rhythmically against his notepad. I took a deep breath. My wife's been having an affair. I want a divorce, and I want to keep the house and custody of my kids. Jack's expression didn't change, but his pen stopped tapping. Do you have proof of the affair? I slid the crumpled steakhouse receipt across the desk. It's not much, but there's more. I caught her with him. In my house? Jack's eyes narrowed. Do you have their names? Her lovers? Not yet. I clenched my jaw. But I'll find out. Jack nodded slowly, making a few notes. It's a good start. Courts don't take kindly to infidelity, especially when kids are involved. If we can prove it, it'll work in your favor. What about the house? I asked. That'll depend on how we play this, Jack replied. If you can prove financial misconduct, her using shared assets on the affair, we'll have a stronger case. I stood up, shaking his hand. Do what you have to. I want this done right. Days turned into weeks, and the divorce process began. I stayed calm on the outside for the kids, but inside, I was on fire. Linda sent me a few half-hearted texts asking about the children, but I ignored them. She didn't get to waltz back into their lives like nothing had happened. One evening, just as I finished helping Brian with his math homework, there was a knock at the door. My stomach dropped when I opened it and saw Linda standing there. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She clutched a bag in one hand, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Philip," she said softly, "can I come in?" I didn't move. Why? Her gaze flicked toward the living room, where I could hear the kids laughing over cartoons. I just want to see them. Please. I stepped onto the porch and shut the door behind me, keeping my voice low. You don't get to show up here like this, Linda. Not after what you did. She flinched, her lip trembling. I miss them. Maybe you should have thought about that before you brought another man into my house. Tears rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Philip. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? I hissed. My fists clenched at my sides as I fought to keep my voice steady. You blew up our family because you were bored. You chose him over us. Linda stared at me, broken and small. I made a mistake, she whispered. I just want to see them. Not tonight, I said firmly. We'll figure out visitation through the lawyers. But you don't get to come and go as you please. This isn't your home anymore. She nodded, defeated, and turned to leave. I watched her walk down the driveway, her shoulders slumped, her bag dragging behind her. For a second, I almost called her back. Almost. But then I thought of Ellie's face when she asked if her mom was coming back. Of Brian's little hand tugging at my sleeve. Linda had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. I went back inside, shutting the door behind me. The kids were still on the couch, their laughter filling the room. I sat down between them, pulling Brian onto my lap and ruffling Ellie's hair. Who was that? Ellie asked, glancing up at me. Just someone dropping something off, I said, forcing a smile. She nodded and turned back to the TV, content with the answer. I leaned back against the couch, the weight in my chest easing just a little. For now, it was just the three of us. I'd make sure they were safe, no matter what it took. Linda could fight all she wanted. She could try to take the house, the kids, the life we built. But I wouldn't let her win. Not this time. The courthouse air felt stale, heavy with silence as I sat outside the courtroom. Jack Forrester, my lawyer, shuffled through papers beside me, unbothered. I, on the other hand, couldn't keep still. My leg bounced uncontrollably, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. You ready for this? Jack asked, looking over his glasses. I nodded. Ready or not, this was happening. Across the hallway, Linda sat on a bench, her hands gripping a file so tightly I thought it might tear. She looked small, like the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. Her lawyer, a young, smug-looking guy in a sharp suit, whispered something to her, and she nodded without looking up. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she was scared, if she knew how far she'd fallen. But then the memory of that receipt, of fighting him in my house, hardened me all over again. Jack tapped my shoulder, gesturing toward the door. It's time. The courtroom was cold, clinical, nothing like the warmth I associated with the idea of justice. I sat next to Jack, my eyes fixed on the judge. She was older, gray-haired, with the kind of no-nonsense face that gave me hope she wouldn't fall for any excuses. Linda's lawyer stood first. I tried not to roll my eyes when he started in on his speech. Your Honor, my client, Linda Mitchell, has been a devoted mother. Yes, mistakes were made. She doesn't deny that, but she remains focused on the well-being of her children. Mrs. Mitchell has been their primary caregiver, while Mr. Mitchell, though a good provider, has maintained a demanding work schedule that limited his involvement. The words made my skin crawl. Mistakes were made. Like she'd burned the dinner, not blown up our entire family. Jack stood, buttoning his jacket before stepping to the center of the room. His voice was calm, clear. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Philip Mitchell, has been the steady foundation of his family for years. While Mrs. Mitchell downplays the severity of her actions, the truth is that her choices, her affair, threaten the stability of their home. Mr. Mitchell has stepped in, providing the care and structure his children need during this difficult time. I saw Linda flinch at the word affair. She should flinch. She earned it. Jack called me to the stand first. I stood, hands shaking slightly, and made my way to the witness chair. I looked at the judge, forcing myself to stay calm as Jack guided me through his questions. Mr. Mitchell, can you describe your role in the family over the past few years? I worked full-time as a supervisor at the mill, I said, keeping my voice steady. I put in long hours to make sure my family had everything they needed. Linda stayed home to care for the kids, and I trusted her to handle things while I worked. And since discovering your wife's infidelity, what has changed in your household? I swallowed hard. Everything. I glanced briefly at Linda, but she was staring at the table. The kids have been asking questions I don't know how to answer. I've done my best to keep their routine normal, school, homework, meals, but they know something's wrong. Jack nodded, his face sympathetic. Would you say you've had to take on more responsibility? Yes, I said firmly. Linda left. I've been the one making sure they're fed, taken care of, and supported. I've done everything I can to protect them from this mess. And how did you discover the affair? Jack asked, his voice dropping slightly. I hesitated, my throat tightening. I caught her. In our home. With him. The words felt sharp coming out, but I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. I'd seen enough lies to last me a lifetime. No further questions, Your Honor, Jack said, stepping back. Linda's lawyer stood next. He walked toward me slowly, his slick smile grating on my nerves. Mr. Mitchell, he began, you work long hours, correct? Yes, I said evenly. And would you say that, over time, you and your wife became emotionally distant? I worked hard to provide for my family, I replied. That doesn't mean I didn't care about Linda. I trusted her. But trust can be broken, can't it? He pushed, tilting his head like he was trying to play therapist. I'm not the one who broke it. I shot back, my voice sharper than I meant. The lawyer paused, clearly not expecting me to fight back. No further questions. Then Linda took the stand. I watched her walk up, her steps hesitant, her face pale. She looked fragile, exactly the way she wanted to look in front of the judge. Her lawyer guided her through soft questions first. Mrs. Mitchell, can you describe your relationship with your children? I love them, Linda said softly, tears forming in her eyes. I've always been there for them. Every school event, every sick day. I made mistakes, but I'm still their mother. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something I'd regret. Jack stood for the cross-examination. His voice was cool and calm. Mrs. Mitchell, where were you on the day Mr. Mitchell discovered your affair? Linda's eyes widened. I don't remember. You don't remember being caught in your home with another man? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I made a mistake, she whispered, her voice shaking. Jack didn't press further. He didn't need to. The silence said more than her words ever could. The hearing wrapped up quickly after that. The judge said she would need time to review the evidence, but I could see it in her expression. Linda's case wasn't holding up. Outside the courtroom, I stood near the window, staring at the traffic below as Jack packed up his papers. Linda sat slumped on a bench with her lawyer whispering frantically beside her. She looked defeated, her shoulders hunched, her eyes blank. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered Ellie asking me if her mom was coming home. I remembered Brian looking up at me with those innocent eyes, trusting me to keep him safe. She made her choice. When I got home, the kids were waiting for me on the couch, wrapped in blankets. Brian jumped up the moment I walked through the door. Dad. I scooped him into my arms, holding him close. Ellie watched me quietly, her eyes searching my face. Did you see Mom? She asked softly. I crouched down in front of her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I did, I said. She loves you both very much, but things are complicated right now. Ellie frowned, but nodded. It's going to be okay, right? I hugged her tightly, holding onto her as if I could keep the world from crashing down around us. Yeah, sweetheart, I said softly. It's going to be okay. I promise. And this time, I believed it. The days after the hearing felt like a waiting game. I spent my time trying to hold everything together, work, the house, the kids, while my lawyer chased paperwork and filed motions. The judge's decision wasn't final yet, but I could feel the momentum shifting in my favor. Linda hadn't tried to come back to the house, and that was fine by me. I kept my focus where it belonged, on Ellie and Brian. One afternoon, about a week after the hearing, I came home early from work. The kids were at school, and the silence of the house greeted me like an old friend. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. I dropped my keys on the counter and opened the fridge to pull out a beer when I heard it, a knock at the front door. Linda. I knew it before I even opened it. She stood there, looking thinner, more fragile than before. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes, red and puffy, were a far cry from the confident woman I used to know. What do you want, Linda? I asked, keeping my voice flat. She hesitated, wringing her hands like she was still rehearsing what to say. Can we talk? There's nothing to talk about, I said, stepping back slightly so the door remained half open. You have a lawyer. So do I. Let them handle it. I don't want to fight anymore, Philip, she said softly. Her voice was cracked, raw. I just want to see the kids. I clenched my jaw, gripping the doorframe so I wouldn't lose my temper. You should have thought about that before you tore this family apart. Her eyes welled up with tears. I made a mistake, she whispered. Yeah, I said bitterly. You've said that already. It doesn't fix anything. I watched her, waiting for her to fire back, to defend herself like she had in court. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping like the fight had gone out of her. Can I come in? She asked. No, I said firmly. You'll see the kids when we agree on visitation through the lawyers. Not before. Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she just turned and walked back to her car, her steps slow and unsteady. I stood there for a long time, watching her drive away, feeling more tired than I had in weeks. That night, Ellie knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, sorting through bills, when she walked in and sat beside me. Dad, she said quietly, Mom called me today. I froze, my hand stopping mid-sort. What did she say? She asked how we were. Ellie replied, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. She said she missed us. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my voice even. How did that make you feel? Ellie shrugged. I don't know. I miss her, but... She paused, frowning. I don't understand why she left. I swallowed the lump in my throat. How do you explain to a child that the person they love let everyone down? That their mother chose someone else over them? Your mom loves you, Ellie, I said carefully, keeping my voice soft. But sometimes grown-ups make bad choices. Choices that hurt the people they love, even when they don't mean to. Ellie looked up at me, her eyes sharp and searching. Is she coming back? I sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, I'm here. Okay? I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, leaning against me for a moment. I held her close, wishing I could shield her from all of this. From the confusion, the hurt, the disappointment. But I knew I couldn't. The next day, Jack called me. Philip, he said, his voice firm. We've got something. I frowned. What do you mean? Linda's finances. Jack replied. Turns out she's been moving money around. A couple thousand here, a couple thousand there. From your joint accounts into one with her name only. I felt my blood run cold. She what? Look, Jack continued. It's not illegal, technically, but it doesn't look good for her. Especially since we could argue that she was diverting funds for the affair. Her lawyer's going to scramble to explain it. I sat back in my chair, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. So what happens now? Now, Jack said, we use it. Combined with the evidence of the affair, it's another nail in her case. If the judge sees this, she'll have no choice but to side with you. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the papers Jack had sent over, statements, transfers, highlighted amounts. Proof of Linda's betrayal, not just of me, but of our family. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust. About the kids. About protecting what was left of our life. When the kids finally fell asleep, I stood in the doorway of their rooms, watching them breathe quietly under their blankets. They deserved stability. They deserved a home that wouldn't fall apart under them. I wouldn't let Linda take that away. Not now. Not ever. The day I confronted Linda about the finances was one I wouldn't forget. I didn't call or text her. I wanted her to see my face when I laid it all out. It wasn't hard to find her. Jack's investigator had tracked her movements for weeks, and lately, she spent most of her time at a small, run-down apartment on the other side of town. When I pulled up, I spotted her car in the lot, parked crooked like she hadn't cared. I knocked on the door. A few seconds passed before Linda opened it, her expression flickering from surprise to guarded. She looked rough. Her hair was pulled back hastily, and her eyes were hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. "What are you doing here?" she muttered. I held up the folder in my hand. "We need to talk." Linda glanced over her shoulder, as if someone else might be there, before stepping aside. I walked into a cramped living room that reeked of stale beer and cheap perfume. The couch cushions were frayed, and dishes sat stacked in the tiny sink. "Nice place," I said bitterly. "Philip," she sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Why are you here?" I didn't waste time. I tossed the folder onto the coffee table, the papers spilling out in a messy pile. "You want to explain why you've been funneling money out of our accounts?" Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I shot back, my voice low but sharp. "You've been pulling money for months. Thousands of dollars. What was it for, Linda? Hush money? Your boyfriend's rent? Did he need a new car?" "Stop it," she snapped, her voice cracking. "It's not like that." "Then what's it like?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Because I've got bank statements that say otherwise." Linda sank onto the edge of the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't think you'd notice, she whispered. I stared at her, incredulous. That's your excuse? You didn't think I'd notice? I didn't mean to. Her voice trembled. He said he needed help. I thought we'd start over, Philip. I thought. You thought what? I cut her off. That I'd roll over and let you ruin everything we built. That I'd let you waltz out of my life, drain our accounts, and take my kids with you. She didn't answer. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. I don't know how I got this far. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You said that before, Linda. And guess what? It doesn't matter anymore. You made your choices. Now you can live with them. When I got home that evening, the kids were at the table doing homework. Ellie was helping Brian with his spelling words, her voice patient as she corrected him. I watched them from the doorway for a moment, my heart aching. They didn't deserve any of this. Dad? Ellie looked up, frowning. You okay? I pushed a smile onto my face and stepped into the room. Yeah, I'm good. You two hungry? How about pizza tonight? Brian's face lit up, and Ellie gave me a small smile. Sure. As I dialed the pizza place, I thought about Linda, sitting in that dingy apartment, surrounded by the mess she created. It should have felt like a victory. I should have felt satisfied knowing her perfect little fantasy life had crumbled to dust. But all I felt was tired. The final court hearing came quicker than I expected. Jack told me to stay calm, that everything was working in our favor now. Between the affair, the financial misconduct, and her lack of a stable home, there's no way the judge doesn't see where the kids belong. I believed him. I needed to believe him. The courtroom felt colder this time. Linda sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look at me once. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was doing her best, that the financial transfers were misunderstood, but Jack tore their argument apart piece by piece. Your Honor, Jack said firmly, gesturing toward the evidence we presented. Mrs. Mitchell's actions show a pattern of instability. My client, Mr. Mitchell, has provided a safe, consistent environment for the children despite these challenges. We ask the court to prioritize their well-being. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. This court finds in favor of Mr. Mitchell. Custody of the children will remain with their father, and the family home will remain in his possession. Visitation rights for Mrs. Mitchell will be limited to weekends. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Linda sat motionless as the judge delivered her verdict. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't react. She just stared down at the table, her face blank, as if she couldn't process what had just happened. I stood, shaking Jack's hand as he congratulated me, but my eyes stayed on Linda. I thought about the woman I'd married, the mother of my children, and wondered how she had become this stranger sitting across from me. As I left the courthouse, I felt relief, yes, but also a sadness I couldn't explain. That evening, I sat with Ellie and Brian on the couch, watching some animated movie they'd picked. Brian leaned against me, half asleep, while Ellie laughed at a silly scene. You're happy, huh? I asked softly, brushing Ellie's hair back. She nodded, giving me a small smile. Yeah, it's nice when we're all together. I kissed the top of her head, my heart full and heavy all at once. It's going to stay that way, sweetheart. I promise. As the credits rolled, I carried Brian up to bed, tucking him under the blankets before pausing at Ellie's door. She was already curled up, drifting off, peaceful for the first time in weeks. Downstairs, I sat alone in the dark, staring at nothing. The battle was over, but the scars would linger. Linda's absence would always be a shadow in the corners of our lives. But we'd get through it. Because now, the kids were safe. And for me, that was enough.